All right, welcome to the Get Optimized podcast, and we are into our CBC preview series. And what we're going to do is we're going to be joined by special guests, and we're going to be talking about CBC because these are the folks that we're hanging out with during CBC. So these are going to be all CBC related things. And let me introduce our guest for today, Mr. Dan Klasen of the Beverage Federation. What's up, Dan? How you doing?
I am good, Chris. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here and talking all things CBC. I can't believe it's already here again. So ready
Oh
for
my gosh, dude. Yeah, it
it.
feels like I was just getting out of CBC Vegas and it was here for me in town.
Yeah,
So even easier for me, but it still feels like, there's follow-ups that I want to do, all this kind of stuff. So I know how you feel, man.
absolutely. Absolutely. But in a good way. It was hard to talk about it in July, like through 2 months afterwards and saying, how do we start planning for next year? But it's a little bit easier now with with it being, in the 60 days out and Indy is the place and I'm getting excited.
It's going to be good, man. Well, before we get too far into the CBC stuff, let's introduce like who you are and so the folks that don't know, who is Dan and what is the Beverage Federation?
Absolutely. The Beverage Federation we are in year three, so I feel like we're still very much the new kid on the block when I go to things, like a lot of things, CBC included, where there's people who talk about how they've been coming for 15 years. But the Beverage Federation we are a group purchasing organization or a smart buying group that put together and work with the beverage community to say, how can you take your members and then introduce them to supply partners where we have contracts in place and introduce them to different services and products that they can use to run their business. And at the end of the day, I talked to a lot of breweries where I said, we're kind of like Costco. We really that kind of hits home and they're familiar with that and we have our members growing on a regular basis. And then our job is really to provide them introductions to a whole host of different partners that run the gambit from services and consulting and solutions all the way up to product.
The Costco of supplies and all
Yeah.
things you need for your brewery and your craft bev business. I love that analogy, man. It's a good one.
It does. It resonates and it gets everybody thinking. And if I could find a way to do it in writing without having a lawyer from Costco show up one day, that's it. But in audio, it really works and people goes, okay, I get it. Tell me more. And we go from there.
Excellent, excellent. So there you have it, folks. That's Dan. See you guys later. That's the end of the episode. Cheers. No. Okay, so let's talk about CBC. So not your first rodeo, right? You were there last year. Is this your second one or third one now?
This is my third one
Okay.
now, and it's been yeah, and so I do feel like I've got a much better handle than year one. Year one, I think for anybody going, whether you're a supply partner or a brewery or brewery and planning, you're drinking from the fire hose. People described it a lot to me as like, oh, it's the Super Bowl and of conferences in the beverage and brewing, craft brewing, and they're not wrong. It's a huge arena, an area, and a lot of people, and so yeah, it's a lot to take in. I learned a lot, but I'm happier now. I think I can get more excited about just knowing with my expectations and what to expect and how to make the most of it.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a good segue into a question I wanted to ask you was like, what are you looking forward to this year? Now that you've got your legs under you, maybe it doesn't quite feel so much like a fire hose. What's on the radar for you going into Indy?
Yeah, it's going to be different in that, well, one, we're really excited about the change in the dynamic. Just, starting from a beverage federation standpoint, we're used to having this, 10 by 10 standard, booth area. And we actually struggle with, you get a lot of people walking by and a lot of different backgrounds in that, some are brewmasters, some are owners, some are brewers in planning and or somehow affiliated in the industry. And for us, one of the challenges is they're walking by and they're in this mindset, and I can see it in their eyes as they're walking by, especially day three. But early on, they're walking by and they're trying to compartmentalize like, who are you and what do you do? And then, next to me is a booth that does hoses, and then on the left is chemicals, and they're walking by like, yep, I know what hoses are, and we've that guy, and I know what down there is what the chemicals are, and they get to us and they're kind of going, it's this look of what is this and what do you do and man, that yellow is bright, and so our branding, and so and that is a lot of we've had a lot of conversations, and I love it. People walk up, and I encourage this to anybody walking to CBC is that you are going around going, what do you do? Tell me what this does. Tell me what you do. It's called it's a work trip. It's probably one of the most fun work trips I've ever gone on. To be honest, I mean, barely work trip because you can walk around and have that what do you do conversation with a beer in hand, and you can bring that supply partner who's been standing there for 6 hours of beer too. So. But what I'm excited about is I think we've gotten a lot better at having those conversations. We've gotten a little bit of awareness. We have members walking around. We have our supply partners walking around. We're just have people are like, "Oh, I've been getting some emails from you. I've seen you guys. Tell me more." So I'm excited about that. And then our big booth layout and design is all tied to this idea of partners, and that I know you're introducing a lot of your listeners to and a group to, is that there's a growing group of us who want to be at CBC and have good conversations, and a lot of times fall into a category that isn't malt, hops or big pieces of equipment. Nothing wrong with that, but that's really easy to spot and be present. And then a lot of other spot partners, want to have some conversations, but need to not just be there, but then be there and figure out how to get you to stop and not see something like, you don't fit into my lexicon, so I'm going to go to the next one. So I now that I've seen it year over year, people are reticent to, have that conversation. It'd be concerning if the environment was, if you aren't in type A or B, then I don't need to stop by. And it's quite the opposite. People are walking around asking, what do you do?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting time with the beer industry because, right now, more than ever, maybe we kind of use that phrase. We probably beat it to death too much in society. Is that now more than ever? But, seriously, though, people need to save money. They got to figure out ways to run their operation more efficiently. And part of that is, of course, an equipment purchase thing. But if you've already got that stuff, you already have your malt supplier, you already have your hop guy, you already got your equipment, or where you're getting your replacement parts and those kind of things. It's like, well, I could see the question being like, well, do I even need to go to CBC? I already have this stuff. And the answer I think you'd probably say is, well, absolutely, because they got to talk to folks like you, and there's other service providers and people out there that can help you run a more efficient operation, which uh, it's why I'm excited about being part of this booth too, is that, here's a chance for us to talk about that stuff and say, look, there's more to running your business than just buying, tanks and supplies, right? There's services, there's legal, there's uh, paper goods, there's all this other stuff that you need to figure out. And, I'm pumped to hear you say that you're excited to help share that message a bit. What do you think attendance is going to be like this year? Last year in Vegas, I heard that it was kind of like a little bit lower of a
Yeah.
year. Indy's a different spot. The industry's in a different spot. You think people are going to make the trip out? You think it'll be more populated this year?
I do think people are going to make the trip out, and I've been hearing some positive feedback of, yeah, we're going. I actually think and I'm gonna pick on your hometown right now, the Vegas.
That's
I
okay.
heard, and I had a lot of fun. It was great and great host, but one of the things that I think Vegas sometimes has, its both its pro and con is, and its same thing as I heard from people was, I didn't bring the whole team because it was costly, and it's costly to be here for a few days. Not so much, getting the hotel and getting the flight out. They make that easy. It's, then it's walking around and all that stuff. But also there's some distractions, and some of the other cities that CBC has been in, where people find their way to maybe the tables or the pool. And one of the things I heard from the theme of within Indy, it's all beer all the time. There's not a lot of distractions to walk outside the conference hall hotel and find yourself doing something. There's plenty of opportunities to go check out some cool breweries, and there's a lot of those things, or to do that. But that is where I think that we're going to get that. Sometimes attendance is a little bit of a tricky number because how many people actually showed up. But I know as a partner, supply partner, I'm curious of how many people are walking through the exhibition hall, and also cursory somehow, how many people are going into some of those speaking events, right? So those are the two things that I'm curious about versus they showed up on the plane and they're there, but they're somewhere at the sphere catching a fish show. So
Yeah,
that
there's
I
like
think is
so
going to make it.
many options in Vegas
Oh
that I
yeah,
think I see your point is that you kind of get, even if it was exactly the same numbers as it was in Nashville or this year or whatever, there's
yeah,
like so many nodes out there, whereas like in Nashville, it was like condensed, right? There's like a couple of places where everybody was at. And from a vendor perspective, that's great because now you've got condensed volume
yeah.
in these spots. But also from just a networking perspective, I think it's better you bump into folks and you just have more chances at bat really to make a relationship. So excellent point. I didn't think about it like that, but good call.
Yeah, it was really in Nashville. One of the things that was easy for me at night to go to two or three things and
Hmm.
then run into some people. And I never had that in Vegas just because of just logistics to get across town in a cab to get to one thing. And then the other one was the other way across town. I mean, in Nashville, I was walking, to one to the one to the next. And it did, to your point. And it was like, oh, hey, I saw you yesterday. I saw that. And hey, you want to, let's have a beer and keep talking about something, or just not maybe talk work, just talk life. And that just didn't happen. And I think it is because there was it was condensed, and there wasn't the ability to spread out as well as have people saying I'm going to go do this, and it's not tied to the or not tied to CBC. But
Hmm.
yeah, and I think so. I think that will be an increase. I think for maybe it is the steady state, and I didn't experience it before. I go to a lot of guild events, and people talk about in 2015, at the conferences, things were three or four deep. People were waiting in line to speak to you, and that sometimes I'm sure that was the case. I think that's part of just an overall larger reaching that, that there's just a compression of who's going, and
Hmm.
that it's not less about, year over year and maybe the economy or location. It's just, there'll maybe a settling of who's going to these. But I did find an interesting thing that someone shared with me. I talked to a brewer and they said, I used to go when I was looking for my big tanks and I needed things like a forklift. And the way they framed it was if I had a big major purchase, I went to CBC.
Hmm.
And they said they went there because usually they could work out a deal there on that. And then they would kick the tires on a few things and make that big decision. And that I think was some, and maybe still is some of the brewers' mindsets of I don't need anything big physically.
Yeah.
And so I don't need to go to a show like that. And I believe there's a switch in that happening is that, and even I've seen it just in a couple of years where they're going, I'm trying to, maybe I'm opening up a second location. I'm adding a line like NA or seltzer or hemp THC based, whatever, and it's new. And so I want to talk to some people. I want to get some cards. I want to learn and talk to some of my buddies who are going to be here too, whatever that is. I want to learn something new. And it doesn't involve buying another big tank right now. And so the other mindset I see more and more is people coming up and saying, what do you do, and how is it helping another brewery? And that's because I know what the hoses guy does, and I know what the chemical
Hmm.
guy does, but tell me about how a mug club could create more revenue for me. Tell me about search engine optimization. Tell me about this and that. Like, what are you doing for others? And it has nothing to do with major purchases.
Well, one idea that you get could be mind blowing for you and could be game changing for your business. And that's something I always get from these kind of conferences is like, even if, business wasn't made at that show or whatever, there's almost always some idea that I walk away with where I'm like, man, that really changed my perspective or opened up my eyes to a totally new concept that I just wasn't thinking about before. I mean, what do you think? Those are there anything, any trends that you see coming out of CBC this year where people are going to have those eye-opening moments? Like, is there anything that you kind of think will happen, from an industry perspective that people are going to walk away from CBC going, okay, this is the new mindset moving forward, or is it too early to tell on and pulling out the crystal ball here?
Yeah, I already have seen some trends. I think some of them are continuation trends of from last year of it, and I've already been to a few shows on a state level and have seen some of that. So that's why I think it's going to continue into
Mhm.
April. And I'll tell you the two that come to mind. One is the existing one, but conversations about contracting brewing and contract brewing, I think is continuing to be a discussion as it gets being brought into more into the open. I feel like even when I started a few years ago, you kind of looked around and it was thought of as maybe a stigma, as you either make it in your own four walls or you don't, and there was some of that us and them, and so I think it's changing, and people are talking about it more and saying, well, maybe I could do that, and I have capacity, and how could I do that? And so, what does the model look like? What do I need to
Mhm.
do? And I think there's more presentations, there's more conversations. What I found really interesting at some events was actually seeing brewers or distillers when it's on the other side of the table at events, sitting there saying, "Hi, I have capacity. Are you a brewing and
Mhm.
planning? I'm a brewery in this, market, and we can make it and ship it and label it and do all this stuff for you." And I feel like a few years ago that was unheard of. So I think it's going to be a more out in the open discussion because I think that's an example of things have gotten more competitive. How can you run your business different than maybe you thought you would 5 years ago? And where can you go and learn about it in a safe environment where you can learn from others who have done it? And nothing better than talking to another brewer or partner or supplier who's been like, we just helped a brewery, 2 months ago do that. So that is a big one that I think is going to continue into this year. I think the alternative beverage line item is going to
Mhm.
be another one where the brew house, you look at it and they say, we have 14 of our beers on tap. And then these two tap handles are something else. It's either wine we made, it's spirits we made, it's ready-made cocktails, it's THC, it's something else that we weren't making 2 years ago. And we had to learn and we did it and we did a testing and we're still learning. And that's a big thing. I was at a show in Michigan with the Perfectly Dosed guys, and people were walking up, and it was the question of, tell me about the laws in my state and
Yeah.
what you've done in my state and who you've helped here. And then we maybe we'll talk because it was very much like, yeah, we've been thinking about it, but I have 100 questions. And I think that's a great place to start.
I think you're accurate with that. The demand for well, it's really kind of like a supply, like an equipment supply opportunity because a lot, breweries that I've talked to, they have these extra tanks because they scaled up at some point
Yep.
because the market demanded that. Now the market's a little different. They're like, well, I've got these tanks, like I got to use them for something, and the contract brew opportunity there is there just from like, hey, we gotta make this asset make money for us. And whenever there's opportunity to make money, all of a sudden everyone's minds change a little bit, I think. And I think you're right about the alternative beverage thing. I mean, every report I seem to see, whether it's from the BA or craft beer advisory services, and these folks that are looking at consumer tastes and wants, it's like you got to have stuff on the menu that's different, and for especially for Gen Z and these younger drinkers that are coming into the market. So I think you're spot on about that stuff. Good call. Look at you.
Well,
You
I would,
crystal ball.
I
Got it.
I appreciate that. I tell you, Chris, I get the first round. Thank you for that. But I want to go back to something on that though too, which I think is interesting. That I was having some conversations about some of these breweries who then actually started some of this new stuff, either contracting or adding like a THC line that they didn't have 2 years ago. I think that many are actually haven't reached it yet, or some have the realization, though, that their mechanism that they stood up to sell craft beer in their market, in their, let's say, region or tri-state area kind of thing. So they had their equipment, they had their tap room, they had their kind of loyalty, their customer base. They had their go-to-market, they had their brand, all that. And now they've added, for example, let's say an NA line and a hard seltzer line and a THC line. You can't take your marketing, your go-to-market thing if you're trying to attract new, Gen Z, for example, all of that. So a realization of like, we need to look at, do we need a separate brand? Do we need a new brand? Do we
Mhm.
need to have, how are we marketing to them? What are social media are we using? Because it's not that we're going in necessarily into our existing audience base and giving them another thing to buy. We're trying to increase market share in our area and bring in a group that doesn't come in today to buy beer. So I think there's this thing of saying, well, no, I've got my marketing figured out. I've got my labels and artwork figured out. It's like, yes, for your craft beer, but you're
Yeah.
going to want to maybe look at creating new labels for that and a new brand, maybe an offsuit, all of this that could be your social media is designed to get people in this age group of this demographic into your brewery to drink beer and have pretzels. And that's me. And so, but then, yeah, you have to be on different sites. Do I say the T word? You might have to put something on TikTok and
Mhm.
to get that out there. And I just sometimes watch those conversations. That's not something we get in there, but kind of that realization that, adding it, making it, is only half the business case. There's a whole other element that goes to this that they're learning together is saying. The other thing I would add to that is I've talked to a lot who are trying to add food, like a restaurant, and they're going, I can't believe I'm going to open up a restaurant. I opened up a brewery to make beer and pretzels and now and serve, frozen pizzas, and now look at us. So all of that kind of makes this whole new way it kind of is a ripple effect of all the things in your business you kind of have to revisit.
Yeah, and I think it's probably easy to get discouraged by that. It's like, oh, I got to figure all this stuff out, and man, it feels like a mountain. And that's where a thing like CBC can be helpful. Is there's people out there that can help you with this. And yeah, everyone's trying to make money, and we have to charge for our services and those kind of things. But like, look, we're all in this together, and we want you to succeed. And you know, let's figure it out. There's somebody out there that knows how to do this stuff or has seen some success doing something, some version of this. And I found that most people are down to help and be like, yeah, this is how we did it. Let me show you,
Yeah.
or let me partner with you on it. And thinking about that vibe of dauntingness of to use your analogy of drinking through a fire hose. I imagine if you're a first time person coming to CBC, whether you're a new brewery or you just haven't made the trip out or whatever, you're gonna be taken aback when you walk into that expo hall. I remember my first time, I was like, oh my God, there is so much stuff.
Yep.
Where do I even start with this thing? And and I know you said you're not, super hardened veteran on this. You've been a few times, but I think you've been enough times to say, hey, look, I got some advice maybe for someone new to the show. What would that be? Somebody who's never been before, what would you say to them and what advice would you give?
Yeah, I would actually, it's very similar what I would say to someone who has been there going their first time as they're going their seventh or 10th time. I went to a lot of conferences just in general, and I've gone to some in Vegas and Chicago and things like that, and some of that size and that scale. And I would say it's different. Um, and one of the things that makes it slightly different, but good in a way, is that there's a social component that can both be a good time to relax and kind of balance the stress that comes to like the checklist of who I want to. So stop and have a beer and or try some, and rest your legs and have a conversation. So that was kind of refreshing that the atmosphere isn't, I've been to other trade shows that it's about, okay, I need to collect these 25 business cards. And I was on the other side of the table and I need to talk to these people in meetings. And so you came out of there just feeling kind of, and then I got to go to these speaking events, and it was very task based and kind of draining. And I think it can be less so at CBC if be just for the pure nature of it's a social group, and that can be a positive. But I would say the first biggest thing is you really got to plan and go through and say these are the people I want to talk to, because what I think the common mistake is they're like, I'm just going to go zigzag up and down, and then when I'm done I'm going to jump out and I'll come back to it and I'll do that. It you can't, You keep going back and this, you skip things. People might not be at their booth because whatever, or or that, or something comes up. And if you go back home and you're like, I didn't even get to the second half. And I've talked to people like, it's day three and I'm only on aisle
There's
12
whole
because I'm
sections
talking
that I
to
didn't even
every
see,
person.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to have your list of, and I would say, these are the people I need to get to. We're encouraging meetings to just be like, hey, I'll meet you at your booth at 11. And then you have that reminder and and you go and because there's something I need to talk to you about that I'm working on this summer or this fall or spring, what have you. And that's key. So I would start there, and that goes for anyone. And I think the difference is for the more I'm 7 years, 10 years running a brewery. I know half the people here, et cetera, et cetera. I would say the challenge, and what I would challenge you is that, and I've done this. I do this too as a supplier. I walk around and I do this. Is you should be walking up to 10 people, 20 people during those 3 days and saying, what do you do? What do you do here? You're not, I tell me what you do and who you do, because you don't fit in the equipment ingredient category. Clearly, you do something to help breweries.
Yeah, tell me
You
more.
provide something of value. Tell me what that is, because I'm not familiar with you guys. What's your project, widget, service? And there's places that every year, even I've been going, but I see that pop up that's like, that's new. That's something that's unique. They're doing this in the wine and the distilling industry and it's having value. So they're bringing it to the brewery. So I don't think you can just walk up or down the aisles with your beer going, I'm the veteran and I know everything. I don't think that because I think that's why attendance down. If that person thinks that they wouldn't go in the first place.
Mhm.
But to really get the value out of CBC, you have to be going like, I want to be in business 3 years from now. So I have to learn, three or four things that I can take back to my organization that we can implement or do. I want that idea that you said, like, whoa, I didn't know that. And I
Yeah.
think I think you're exactly right about what breeds that atmosphere. And I would say this to both the first time goer and the 7 years. Like if you feeling like this feels like I have too much now, it's like doom and gloom, like industry stats, first year in how long that there's been more closings and openings, like all that. I would shake off the two as a small business owner myself. The two people that I always like talking to is one, just someone that's in the trenches with me and just having a beer, another brewery owner who's just in a, just hey, and it's got to be like, you know what? Is it as easy as the golden era of 2015? No, but it's just how it is, and we'll got to get a little smarter and a little better, and we'll make it. And then the other one is I love talking to a supplier of something, and they saying, I've done this for two other organizations like yours, because it's like, oh, okay, someone else had that issue. And you seem to have something that solves it. Let's talk more afterwards. I feel better when I walk away. I'm like, I got my person I can commiserate with, and then I've got my person that who can help me, and it doesn't feel like I have this in my life that I don't feel like it's a one-off where they're like, yeah, we just did that exact same thing for three other organizations last week.
Mhm.
We'll give you a call and we'll help you out. And sometimes it's something small. I'll tell you the example that I had in my world. I was scheduling meetings and it was very time sensitive and all of this stuff. And someone introduced me to Calendly, the horribly named little icon software that helps you schedule. And this is an example of though, like everyone's like, well, no, you got to save money, cost down. I'm like, no, this was something that I looked at. They explained how it worked. I did a little research, tried it, it worked. I pay a small cost, but the value is much more so than the cost. It helps save me time, which is more valuable than, and it was just a
Yes.
small example of like, it's not all cost reduction. So, I mean, that would be the same lens of walking around CBC. What do you do that you could provide me value, could help me either increase costs, increase sales, decrease costs, save me time? I mean, there's a couple of buckets there that I think you should be thinking about rather than
That's
just,
something that, like, man, brewery folks, brewery leadership, I think that so many folks, I'm just speaking from the people that I've talked to, and a lot of people I've talked to, is don't quite value their time enough. And like, well, it's going to cost me money, or it's going to cost me money to hire somebody to do this stuff. And I'm like, man, why are you mopping the floors? Like your time per hour, if you really look at what that should be, and you could calculate this out, is so much more. Like you are costing your business money by you mopping the floors or you doing XYZ, running the host stand or whatever. It's like there's somebody out there that really would love that job. And, you paying them the money to do that opens up time for you to focus on the things that are going to make you more money at the exponential level moving forward, whether that's marketing or business relationships or looking at the books and cleaning up costs that don't really need to be there and those kind of things. And you touch on this, like the Calendly system is part of that. It saves you time in operational, and the folks that know what that is, they know, but like, yeah, there's probably so many opportunities in your business for you to be cutting back time and putting it back in the calendars. Maybe it's you cutting back time, or getting time back in your week to go spend with your kids or your wife or yourself and read a book or something, like, and enjoy your life better. And those kind of opportunities absolutely exist out there. And that's why we're here, right? I mean, let's talk about your booth actually, Dan. I mean, what are you guys doing? What are you planning for CBC for you guys at your booth?
Yeah, we do something a little different where we typically have I've got the tablet ready to go if people want to check out the website. And that's usually just to give them a visual of like we have a website and where we collect all of this. And when you get home and we send you some information, if you want to grab some information, you can check out the website. That really does kind of help them think that we've put it all in one spot for them. But what I'm really trying to get at them is that it's a network of partners, and there's a lot of different partners in there that can help. So that's the idea. Imagine, walking up to someone at I'll use Costco again and being like, "What do you have inside?" and kind of thing. So
Yeah.
elements of it. And so we have some things out at the table that are examples of smaller stuff to let them know it's just a wide range of things from merchandise and stickers and examples of professional services. But one of the things I kind of try to introduce very quickly is yes, we have can partners and yes, we have ingredient partners. And I understand they're big line items, but there's so many other things that go into running a business that you don't realize that you're probably on autopilot, like I am, of a lot of things of like buying or doing or not doing because you just don't know it exists. That's,
Mm.
when I introduce them to a professional services partner, they're like, I didn't even know someone does that or did that. And so it's
Yeah.
just kind of an education. So that's where we spend some time is, I bet the last 20 purchases you made as an organization were not in cans and ingredients. You didn't real you bought toilet paper, you bought floor mats, you bought receipt paper, you bought paper clips, you
Yeah.
bought hoses and chemicals, all of these things, and they weren't hops and malt and cans. And so it's like there's all this potential there. And so that kind of leaves them with, as you're walking up and down that, be thinking that just because, maybe if, the evaluation and some of this starts a little bit with, maybe you grab a few cards of Hose's partner because you haven't exactly been happy with your current provider. So, that's maybe a thing. Another reason to be there is I'm gonna meet a few new people because our service has been lacking. But we also try to do funny shirts
Love
because
your shirts.
well, I gotta say, believe it or not, Chris, Excel and math are not as fun for some people as I
No.
find them. So we have to lead a little bit with our sense of humor, and it seems to resonate because it's a combination of data nerd and just straight up sci-fi nerd. And you can usually find, someone who falls into one of those two camps, and maybe some people walk up and be like, Beverage Federation, like Star Trek. I'm like, yes, you're my people. Come on in. I've got something for you. And so that is definitely a part of it. But also, I think it goes into usually we're talking about either some dry content or sometimes things that are really stressful, like
Yeah.
the other T word that everyone's talking about with tariffs. I'm having a lot of conversations about tariffs. So I try to use a little humor to lighten the mood of like with some processes and some steps, you'll be okay. There's some challenges ahead, but we can help, and others can help too. So that's where, and if not, hey, you get you got a free shirt.
A good shirt, a funny shirt.
They are great shirts. They're soft and they're yeah, someone will strike. But that's usually our booth is it's a lot of conversations about what are you working on? What can, tell it the whole goal of ours is that there's an understanding of what we do and why it might make sense to talk afterwards.
Yeah.
It's not to give them bells and whistles of how our platform works. That's if there's interest afterwards. We don't do a lot of demos at the booth. Yeah, we're trying to make sure that there's awareness that we exist, and then afterwards, if they want to kick the tires, they can.
I've seen you at your booth, and I've had lots of conversations with you, and you're such a down to earth, easygoing guy and genuine person. That I think that bleeds off into the conversations that you have, and uh, I think anybody who's in the right fit here to talk to you should go and at least have a conversation with you, Dan. Which maybe that's a good question. Is there, like who should visit your booth? Who's the right kind of what stage of brewery are they in? Does that really matter so much, or who should come up and talk to you?
Yeah, I know it. I appreciate that, and I want to say everyone, but I'll give you some characteristics of some people
Anybody
that
with
we.
money and a pulse, yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
there you go. There you go. Or I've had a few people walk up and be like, "You look thirsty," and there's a sample beer around the corner. So yeah, really that. But we work really well. So breweries and planning I feel like they are just you can almost spot them. They got the list, they got the thing. Great, come on up because they usually don't have a person for anything. We work with a lot of breweries and planning. And trust me, they're gonna get everyone's gonna give them rib them a little bit like don't do it, and don't, that someone said that to them 4 years ago and they still did it. They probably did it during COVID. But those we help a real lot because they are trying to build their network. And then also, I find that when there are breweries that are in their first 3 years, I call it the hair on fire stage because that's where
Mm.
I'm at a lot of times too, as we've come out of it. But they're really trying to just get things going and get enough beer to the tap room. But as they come out of that, we see a lot of inquiries from breweries that are starting to think like, okay, now I've got a few employees. We're thinking about a second location. We're thinking about adding new things. We're not operating in our first 24 months. We can lift our head slightly to go, is there areas we can make improvements to? Is there something we have enough time to look at a little data and figure out, is that the best choice for CO2 partner or labels or for who we picked? We just picked who we Googled for this. Is there someone that we need to look at? So for that, those are kind of our areas of people to stop by. And I'll tell you, Chris, where my interest and passion and people come to the booth, I'm always excited to talk about it. I ran a business for several years and I didn't give any attention to cost saving measures or purchasing or I was 100% sales. And so I feel like and when we had to close that business, and it was incredibly hard, but I spent years kind of thinking what went wrong. And one of the things was it just didn't give any time. And you talk about time and the importance of taking your time. You're
Yeah,
exactly right. If you're working on the wrong stuff, other bigger things, and you don't know they're bigger, sometimes slip through. So, and the excuse you sometimes use is like, well, someone's got to sweep, someone's got to, change the toilet paper in the restroom. It's like, yes, but then someone didn't look at, cost comparison
real
and
big stuff. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And so I'm pretty passionate about saying, I'm like, this stuff's important. I know you got a lot of stuff. You got HR stuff, you got sales stuff, you got this. I'm like, you got to give some bandwidth to this swim lane, and I'd love to help out. I did realize recently that I think that the beverage industry, especially for craft brewing, it's one of the industries where people provide a lot of unsolicited advice. We're like, you know what you need to do? And it
Everyone's
also
a genius.
sometimes
Yeah.
comes off as like, hey, you know what you need to add to your to-do list today? And I find myself as a small business owner, like my knee jerk is like, I wanna, literally like walk away from that conversation when someone says, you know what you need to do. But I get that they're well intentioned, but it sounds like someone sitting there like Norm at Cheers Bar being like, what you need to do is, and I'm trying to frame it differently into what can we take off your desk? Like, what can we do
Love
for
that.
you? Because, and if you don't have anything on your mind, you should think of something that you can let go of or assign to somebody else or have someone else work on. Because it sounds like the last thing you need is, you should work on, you should
Yeah.
you should go get a quote for 16 koozies. That's what you should do this weekend, and
Yeah.
that'll help you save money. But I'm
Well,
still guilty of it.
yeah, it's easy to fall into that. And Dan, I super appreciate, all the advice you've given here. I know this is going to be valuable for a lot of folks. And, I wish we had, I'm sure we'll have more conversations like this. I can't wait to hang out with you for CBC. We're gonna be hanging out together in our booth space there. It's gonna be super awesome and fun. Real quick before we go though, if someone's trying to get in touch with you before CBC, if maybe they want to connect and do a scheduling of something while they're there or even beforehand, where can they go to connect with you?
Absolutely. My email's the best at dan@beveragefederation.com, or just go to our site, beveragefederation.com, and there's a variety of different ways to get a hold of you there through either setting up a call or pinging me an email. And that's the best way to get started so that we can connect and talk to the right people or connect at CBC.
Perfect. I certainly encourage you to go say what's up to Dan, bring him a beer because he's going to be thirsty for sure. And I think that's it for today. Thanks again, Dan, so much for the time. We'll see you in a couple months, man.
That sounds good. Thanks again, Chris.
See ya.